So, hello everyone. My name is Regina. I'm the Executive Director of Food Recovery Network, and a continuation of the many incredible conversations that I've had during Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week. Just to bring everyone into this particular conversation, I first want to say thank you and say I'm filled with gratitude for the communications that we've had during Homelessness and Awareness Week. What we're trying to do here at Food Recovery Network is continue to build a space for us to have conversations around the intersections between hunger, food insecurity, homelessness, being unhoused, and what it means to be secure, to be economically secure, so that we have that access to food that we deserve, that we have that safe and stable housing that we all deserve. Um, Please, see us on Instagram. We have many videos there. All throughout this week, we are putting content out to again build this space for us to pool all of our ideas, our thoughts, our experiences, so that we can widen our aperture of awareness. And importantly, many of you I know are working so hard to end hunger, to end homelessness, to ensure people have access to transportation so that they can get to their many jobs. I know that many of us are working so hard to do that already, and for that I'm very grateful. And I know that many of us are interested in ways that we can be more involved. So we want to create this space for information sharing, but also so that we can draw inspiration and ideas for how we can be involved or be more involved and make further connections. And with that, I am so excited to be joined today by a wonderful, incredible person that I've just met and I know is just an incredible, incredible person, Chris Todd. I was introduced to Chris by one of our Food Recovery Network national board members, and I am just so thankful to have gotten to know Chris. Chris and I have talked a couple of times now, and through the conversation that I first had with Chris was thinking, oh my goodness, everyone needs to hear what Chris, the experiences that Chris has and how Chris is activating in her community in Illinois. So, Chris, hello. Thank you for joining us for this conversation.
It's wonderful to be here, Regina. Thank you.
Oh, it is absolutely my pleasure, my honor. Thank you. Chris, I was hoping that again, I know that you and I have had a couple of conversations already. Would you mind just telling everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, let's see. I have a background as an academic in child and family development, so did that for a number of years and worked a lot in the areas of childcare and with limited resource audiences and prevention programs for families. And then I retired and did retirement things. And one of the things I enjoyed doing was volunteering at our church, and that's kind of what led into what I do now.
Excellent. And, so you have a deep background in supporting your community members to receive that access and intervention points. Before we talk about what you're up to now, could you maybe give everyone a little bit of insight as to, what that meant for you, maybe on the day to day, how that showed up in the work that you did?
Do you mean when I was in a job or?
Right. Yeah, that you
Oh,
had
okay.
mentioned. Yeah.
I actually started my career having a faculty appointment that was a little different. I had a cooperative extension, a faculty appointment. And for those of you who know, cooperative extension is housed at land-grant universities, and it has the mission to take the research and knowledge of the university out to the public, but also to listen to the public and bring information from the public back to the university. So we aren't sitting in an ivory tower all the time. And so my job, rather than teaching on campus for the first part of my career, I would go out to the local counties in Illinois, and the local extension agent would have set up programs for teachers or childcare providers or parents. And we would, I would have talk about things with them and try and address questions they had and issues they had, and most importantly, learn from them and bring that information back. And then I also helped to set up after-school childcare programs because that was the era of the latchkey child when I started. There was no school-age childcare, so worked on that for a bit. And then worked in Chicago for 5 years, which was just a wonderful experience. in 4 different neighborhoods and working with local schools there to try and address issues in their community.
Wonderful. Thank you for that
Mhm.
background. What a fascinating career. I'm sure you have talked to so many people and just the idea of hearing from the community and what their needs are
Mhm.
and bringing that back to the university. As we know at Food Recovery Network, the university setting is a place where ideas can happen, innovation can happen,
Right.
and to have that mutual relationship with the community really means we can see that community change happen.
It's a wonderful model. Every university and college should have it, and most do in one way or another.
I agree with you. And yesterday I had a conversation, hasn't been put out yet, for our Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week conversations, but I talked with Reverend Carolyn Foster, and a big part of the work that she does in her ministry, and her efforts with Poor People's Campaign is bringing the community members to the conversations so
Yes.
that those who are in positions to make community changes are
Mhm.
hearing directly from the community members. So it's so nice to hear that approach echoed in your voice too, Chris.
Mhm. That's a huge part of what we do, that we've done in my career, but also with the current program that I'm with. That's a huge piece of what we do.
That's great. And I would love to transition to, yes, what are you up to now? Please fill us in on your busy time as, someone who is retired, but I know you're doing so much, so please do let us know.
Sure. Well, right now I help to coordinate a food ministry, we call it, that's sponsored by 7 local congregations. It's an interfaith ministry, so we have people from many different religious backgrounds, and it's open to anyone. There's no religious component to it for those we serve. It started out 2014 approximately in one church here in Urbana, the First Presbyterian Church of Urbana. And they had at that time, I think, a pretty traditional program, food program. They had worked with the local food bank and come up with bags of food that they would give out when people would walk in. That church is located pretty much in the middle of campus almost, or on the edge of campus. And and also a lower income neighborhood isn't too far away. So they'd often have people coming in asking for food. And so this was a way of helping that. But they didn't have a lot of bags of food. They had 2 kinds, food for a family of 4 for a week, or food for a homeless person for a week. And they would have more people line up to get it than they had food. And so I was working with them at that time. And so as people were lined up, I would go out and ask them, I'd say, do you use everything that's in the bags? And they'd say, well, no. Sometimes we don't need it, or sometimes we don't use that food in our family. But they'd always say, but we don't waste it. We give it to someone else who needs it. That was all very important to them. But I said, would it be better if we took the food out of the bags and just put it on the table, and then you could take what you wanted? And they said, yeah, that would be better. And so we started doing that. And what that did 2 things. One is people got what they wanted. I think they were happier. And secondly, we suddenly could serve a lot more people because we'd been at the point of not being able, we had people lined up that we'd run out of food for when we had the bags. And I remember one time this woman came in a stroller. She'd come on the bus with her children, and one of them in a stroller, and she got there and all the bags were gone, and I just felt terrible. So this solved that problem too. So we were able to stretch further. So we did that for quite a while. And then, as usual, suddenly we didn't have enough food again. We had more people coming, and it was all word of mouth. We were not part of the local food bank at that time. Partially that was because at that time, the food bank here, we are blessed in Champaign-Urbana. We have many, many, many groups that provide food, and the food bank supports all of them, almost all of them. And at that time, they were trying to work with their existing providers and trying to encourage some to be open more often, more than once a month, which many of us were. Well, more than once a month just didn't fit us at the time. And so it just wasn't a good match at that time. So that's the only reason we weren't part of the food bank at that time. But we got to the point where we didn't have enough food for everybody that came because they were just talking word of mouth. And so the point, at that point, the church had an option, two options really. They could basically just turn people away because that's what we had to do before, or we could think about finding another church that could partner with us. And that was the route they wanted to go. And so we brought on a second church. This one was within the same denomination, Westminster Presbyterian. And we had some connections between congregation members between the two, and that's kind of how they got in. And so we went along with that by having them come in. They provided volunteers. Their members donated money, and the pantry is completely supported by donations from church members. And so we were able to serve more people. And so more people came and word got out, and suddenly we didn't have enough money anymore to serve the people that were coming. So we did the same thing. Should we just, hold it here or find another congregation? And we found another congregation, and that just came, it just kept going. We actually found 3 congregations because we brought in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they had 3 wards locally, and all 3 of them became involved. So that went along, and then pretty soon we needed to expand again. So St. Peter's United Church of Christ came along, and then the Disciples of Christ Community Church came along, and now Sinai Temple has a lot of volunteers, and we're in discussions with. And so we have many, many, many congregations that were able to join this effort, and because of the richness of all of those wonderful, caring people, we're able to serve more people.
That's amazing, Chris. I love hearing that story. There's so many things that you discussed, in the growth of talking about this wonderful interfaith um, effort to help ensure that the people within your community have the food that they deserve. Technical question that I have for you:
Sure.
with all these many different churches involved, are community members able to go to all of these different churches, or does the food pickup happen at one location?
It just happens at one location, and we had to change the format because of COVID. Up until COVID, our partners, that's the name we use for the people who get food, and we do that because we consider them partners in this project. They help us build the project, so that's why it works well. So our partners would come to First Presbyterian originally, and they would pick out their food. We'd have volunteers there that would help them. We had kind of a grocery store kind of thing that we'd set up, and they'd pick out the food. And many of them came on the bus. Maybe a quarter of them had cars, but about 3/4 came on the bus. Well, when COVID came, we couldn't do that anymore. And we needed to go to most pantries were going to a drive-up mode, and they would just give out boxes of food. We couldn't let them come in and pick anymore. And that wasn't our model. We have relationships with the people that we serve, and we really needed to keep in relationship with them. And so we decided to go to a pickup for those who have cars, but also a home delivery model, because so many of our people could not come.
Right.
And we also gave out as much food as they needed for the whole month. Before, they used to come and they could take one of everything. And in hindsight, I think, what were we thinking? One little can of tuna fish for the family with 7 people is not generous. And so now they could take whatever they needed, because we didn't want them to have to go to other pantries. That was dangerous during COVID. Early days anyway, you needed to stay in. We also always gave out 1 household item, because our partners had said that I can't get household items anywhere. And, most people don't understand that food stamps don't cover any household items, including diapers, including feminine hygiene products, including incontinence products, and certainly not personal care like toothpaste and shampoo or cleaners for your home. So we also started giving out toilet paper, dish soap, laundry detergent, and bar soap, and if they needed it, masks and hand sanitizer and disinfecting wipes. So everybody got that every month. And to do that, we had to move to a different congregation because First Presbyterian was not set up to allow drive-ins very easily. There was no off-street drive-in that we'd be able to use. So we moved the operation to St. Peter's, and that is where it still is now. And so we at that time too, we had to make a major shift because all of our volunteers pretty much were 65 and older. And at the beginning of COVID, we were not allowed out in the community.
Right.
And so we had to get a whole new crew of volunteers from the community of young people. And they all stepped up and they came and they had to set up a whole new pantry, a whole new system. I couldn't even be there. I had to do everything by Zoom and telephone. They set it all up, and within a month we were up and running with a totally different situation, all new volunteer base. And we continued that all through COVID. Once vaccines came out, we were able to, us old people were able to come back again. And so we came back, and some of the younger people had to transition back to work. They now had to go back to work. And so we transitioned again. So now we have a combination of the church congregation members, and we have also community members that are volunteers. And so even though we call it a ministry, it is really a collaboration between the congregations and the community, both in terms of the people we serve being part of the decision-making process, and then having community members from both the congregations and the community itself.
Everyone listening, I told you, Chris, it's so inspiring. It's just incredible to hear how you worked through so many different challenges. Now, I have a question for you, but one thing I wanted to highlight before I get to that question is, you had talked multiple times about how your community members are getting to the church. And for many people, that is taking a bus or taking public transportation of some kind. And so for everyone listening in, this is an intersection that we wanted to pull out in terms of hunger, being unhoused, and transportation access, and how difficult transportation can be. And, hearing Todd's interfaith collaboration move with that understanding that oftentimes not only is it difficult to take a bus, have a stroller, have little ones, but the money that it takes to do that, and then sadly coming to a place where for all that effort, maybe not having the food that you had hoped that you could have, but also hearing you, Chris, say that you kept the food collection in one place so that family members are not having to go here and there and here and there to quilt work together the food that they need to keep their families functioning for the week, for 2 weeks, for the month. And so I just wanted to pull that out. And then again, that next pivot of we're going to go to the folks during COVID who normally would be on that bus to make it easeful for them. And in fact, Chris, with that was the benefit, the gift of giving them back their time.
Yes. That's the thing that I don't think people understand very much. Being poor is a full-time job.
Yes.
You have to every minute of the day try and know that the time you're spending is maximizing the resources for your family. And so time is a very valuable commodity. And people have this perception that everybody's sitting around watching TV,
Right.
That is
Right.
just not what life is like. And when after COVID got better and people could get out again, we asked all our partners, would you like to go back to the old system? And, a number of them said, we miss seeing you. We'd like to see you more, but we do call them every month and update their order by phone. So we do have a contact with them still every month. But they said, honestly, this is better for us. And one woman related how she cared for her elderly mother. She was her caregiver. And when she had to come get food on the bus, she had to leave her alone to come and get food because there wasn't anyone to help, stay with her during that time. And how, she was just, she had to choose between her mother's safety and food. I mean, it's a terrible choice to have to make. So it's much better the way we do it now. It's a lot more work. It is a lot more work, but it is the right thing to do.
That's That's so beautiful to hear. And even in the caring that, again, your interfaith coalition brings to this, the learning of how can we make this easier for the people that we love and want to serve who are experiencing hardship? How can we make it easier for them? And that includes, oh my goodness, we need to provide a full month's worth of food. Oh my goodness, let's continue to go to where they are. It is just a wonderful, um, journey that we're
Mhm.
all learning from you, Chris. And thank you for providing the details because I know so many of the student leaders listening in, they're taking notes because so many of us are really engaged in that technical work of, okay, on Tuesday, what's the food available? What does the programming look like? On Wednesday, where are we going to collect the food from? So these details are really so important to the practitioners of
Yeah.
love,
Yes.
throughout the F1
Well,
community.
and let me give you one more detail that I want that
Wonderful.
we have discovered that we haven't solved yet. We call everybody to update their orders, and they also have to be available by phone so the delivery drivers can reach them before they drive out there with the food. And we have discovered that phones are a terrible problem. That is the last thing that gets paid. And so you may not have a phone, and we can't get a hold of the people. And that's, a terrible thing. These days, you cannot live without a phone. There are no pay phones anywhere. If you
Yeah.
don't have a phone, you don't communicate with anyone. And so we have a patchwork. I have backup numbers for people, a neighbor, a sister, or something like that, that I can call if their phone is off. But we have to solve that. There are things that we refer to as the government phones. You're supposed to get a free phone.
Oh,
They are not effective. They are not effective. And because you run out of minutes or for one reason. And so if you run out of minutes on some plans, then you're charged for any calls beyond that. And those charges add up, and then your phone's
right,
turned off because you haven't
right,
paid.
right.
So that is something, and internet access, that is the other thing we have got to work on. Communications are keeping people down just
Yes.
terribly. You can't do anything these days without the internet. In this community, you cannot sign up for a COVID booster without going on the internet. You cannot sign up for affordable housing without doing it on the internet. And so you've got people that have no internet access. Because they have no internet access, they don't have computers. Because they don't have computers, they don't know how to use them. And they have to somehow do all these things that are second nature to young people and people who are able to afford a computer and internet. So that is the challenge we're faced right now, and we're trying to think about how to address it. I want to just go out and buy a phone for, I want to become a mini phone company. And people can get the phone for me and pay me the
Yeah,
$25 a month or something like that, because we have to solve this.
it's so true. The Chris Todd family plan,
That's
phone
right.
plan, um, thank you for illuminating that, because it does ease into the next question that I wanted to ask you. But I also, I feel you're absolutely right that with internet, this invention that has, as we all know, this is a truism, wildly transformed the human existence.
Mhm.
That I feel like this is almost becoming a human right. You need to have access to the internet, and um, in your description of the lack of these resources, phone, internet, the isolation that comes
Yes.
from that, the
Yes.
inability of these people who work so hard and want to live in an easeful life, their inability to do that for themselves because of a bigger structure
Mhm.
in place makes it impossible.
Yeah.
Um, And so for everyone listening in, Chris laid out this real life problem for the community that she is working to solve. What are your ideas? How can we help Chris with this idea to ensure that the people in the Champaign-Urbana community have consistent access to phones, have consistent access to internet? Because again, during COVID, people couldn't go to the library to
Right.
access. Maybe if they have an elderly loved one at home, they don't leave their homes because they don't want to leave their loved ones to go to the library or to other locations. So these are truly the humanness, the connectedness that we need to ensure is thriving and is fluid Chris, within that, I wondered if you could talk to us about, you and I talked about this before, but the folks in your community that you are helping, that you are serving. Could you tell us a little bit about, what that community looks like? Who are the folks that are
Sure.
coming for food, that need food delivered to them?
Sure. I think each program might serve different clientele. So we have some pantries that are close to campus and have a large student population. So my population may be different from other pantry populations,
Sure.
but we tend to get a huge number of people who are elderly, disabled, or have serious health problems. I would say about half the people we serve would fall in that category. And I know that we never ask people, but they share it. So that's how
Sure.
I know. We do ask if they're 62 or older, just so I have records. um, about another 11% are working. And I know that because we have to um, arrange their schedules, delivery so that it works
Sure.
with their schedules. And the challenge is many of these people have schedules that change constantly. And so each month we have to figure out what day are you working? Okay, we'll bring it on this day instead. So that's another challenge. Many people are working odd hour jobs that have inconsistent schedules, and that's a
Right.
stress really for
Yes.
people. I don't know about the other 40%. They may all be working too. I don't know. I only know the ones that I know because we have to work the schedules around. But I do know that those people tend to be, the remaining 40% or so, tend to be larger households. And they often have children and older adults in them, and very few working age adults. And so my guess is that it's a caregiving issue, that they need to be home to provide the care to the children or the elderly components.
Yes.
And, our community, like almost all communities, does not have much affordable childcare or care
Right.
for the elderly. So
Right.
many people are being the caregivers of their family. And if they're not working, that's a challenge. And they can't work because they have to be the caregivers to their family. So I would say that, those are the most common characteristics. We have all ages, though, from young to elderly. I think our oldest is 84
Wow.
and
Wow.
just a delightful person.
I bet.
And I know this because they share this with me. And
Yes.
we have strong relationships with each other. So they're a
Yes.
delightful group of people, and I enjoy working with them so much.
Oh, and I'm sure, Chris, they love being able to communicate with you and build a relationship with you too. And that's what this is all about. And, I wanted to just comment to everyone listening in that perhaps you listened to the conversation that we had not too long ago about this was a conversation just for our student leaders, younger folks who are, voting and younger into their right to vote. And Angela Lynn was our moderator for that conversation. And Angela was talking about voting is so important. And we all need to show up to vote because all of our races, all of our faith, all of who we are needs to be represented when we go out to vote to be more inclusive for all of us. And Angela also made a point that to have these kinds of conversations, yes, it's so important to vote, and that's how we participate. But the conversations and the activities have to continue even outside of voting day, because what Chris just mentioned, these conundrums that so many people find themselves in. You can't work because you need to take care of your elderly loved ones or your children. And we just structurally make that virtually impossible for a lot of people. So many people in the Champaign-Urbana community that Chris is helping to support. So when we all can, make note of that, talk about it, and understand ways that we can remove these structures that make it so difficult for people to have that economic security that they deserve, that they are working towards. These are the moments, when we hear directly from Chris talking about this, this is what Angela was talking about. This is what this space is all about. So I just wanted to make that point.
Could
And
I add
Chris,
a thing
oh,
about voting?
please. Yes,
Um, it,
wonderful.
we do a lot of partnerships with other groups in the community, and one of them we partnered with was the League of Women Voters.
Wonderful.
And they prepared wonderful materials that we sent out. We send a letter out each month to our partners, and we included in there with information on how to get registered and where to find information on the candidates and where to vote. And we did that for the primary and then again for the election. And our partners, many of them already vote, but there were some who didn't
Right.
vote before and didn't know how. And we got a lot of praise for that
Beautiful.
from our partners. They said, this is useful information. We needed this. Thank you. The League of Women Voters also learned, because they realized you have to do special things when you're dealing with audiences that have, limited resources. So they sent out a registration form to vote that you could mail in. And I said, okay, that's just fine, but you got to give them an envelope, a stamp, and a pin.
Yes. Yes.
Because they don't have these things. And so they did.
Exactly.
And we put them in a little baggie and put it in the envelope with them. And the partners all said that was critical to their being able to actually exercise their right to vote. It's something that simple: an envelope, a stamp, and a pen.
Right. That is so incredible. That is just incredible, Chris. The power of thinking through how to make things easeful for the
Mhm.
folks that we see that are struggling and we no longer want them to struggle. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Um, Chris, I wanted to move over to a story that you'd told me that I hoped
Mhm.
that maybe you could tell everyone listening in, but I think it ties to something that you had also mentioned with, you know, the phone conversation to make sure that the deliveries can happen. And oftentimes, for many of the folks who are working, they are working varied schedules. They're working, maybe shift work. And so for many of you out there, you might be yourself working, hourly jobs where you do not have that consistent schedule. And we know that many folks in the fast food industry, I think Starbucks might be a really specific example that many of you have heard about, are working to ensure that they can rely on a stable schedule. It's not that they don't want to work, but if you have children, if you're caring for elderly folks, if you are going to school, working the late shift and then having the next day work the opening shift, having 3 days off in a row, and then 14 days on, again with varied shifts, it makes it so difficult and stressful for folks. Um, and so, Chris, you had talked to me about, speaking of that, and many of these jobs are minimum wage jobs. And Food Recovery Network, we are in our pursuit for economic security, working to get rid of that myth of it being okay to suppress wages. People
Mhm.
deserve their wages for their work.
Right.
You had told me in your community efforts to help support individuals, you had worked with one particular gentleman who was trying to get his Social Security benefits. Could you talk to us about that story and
Sure.
what you found? Yeah.
Sure. One of the things I try and do is, if people are trying to achieve something, I can help them. I can get them hooked up with an agency, or sometimes help them fill out a form or something like that. And this gentleman was applying for some Social Security benefits. And so I had the form, and I also saw his Social Security form, that shows how much you worked each year, because we had to fill that in on the application form. And I looked at it, and I was so struck, because he'd worked virtually every year. Maybe there was one year that he hadn't, and he said that was because he was caring for his mother that year or something. But the amounts were so low. And I said, well, was it because you were working part-time? And he said, no, I worked full-time. And I said, well, the amounts are so low. And he says, well, I only got minimum wage when I could get it. I didn't always even get minimum wage. You just had to take what you could get. And I mean, I looked at that and I thought, that can't be right. So I actually went back. I went on the well, first of all, I went on the web, and I found out how much minimum wage was during the time of his working years, from the time he turned 18 until the time he would have retired at 62. And this was, a few years ago now. And so I got that, and then I multiplied that out. And I said, if you were getting minimum wage and you worked 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, never took a day off, any time off, every year from the time he was 18 to the time he was 62. And I took that amount each year and I put it in the Social Security calculator online, so we can see how we're doing for when we retire. So I put those figures in every year. If he worked every day from the time he was 18 until the time he was 62, never took a day off and got minimum wage, he would have gotten less than $800 a month for that. And so it made me so aware of this is how we institutionalize things. It's not intentional. We're not trying to be bad, but it just perpetuates the inequity to go into retirement. So that's something we really have to be aware of.
Thank you for telling us that story, Chris. And again, this is all, trying to illuminate for folks, the real life struggles that so many people have. Working folks. Yeah, I know this person was very proud of the work that he put in.
Mhm.
People feel connected to their work. They want to work. And at the end of that time, a whole lifetime of work, the structure ensures that this person cannot meet his economic needs
Right.
if he were to rely solely on Social Security. And we have to change that.
Yeah.
Um,
And the other thing we have to realize is that people who are working minimum wage have no opportunity to put any savings aside for retirement. They can't
exactly.
even live day to
No,
day, let alone put away savings for retirement. So, that's the other way. Most of us were able to have retirement accounts in addition to Social Security. And we're always told Social Security should not be your only retirement. But when you're working minimum wage, there is no other source of retirement.
there's no other safety net. And as somebody who, lived that for, at this point, still more than half of my life, I understand that completely. If you are able to put aside any little of that money, you literally will get a flat tire or gas prices will go up. And it is eaten away. You save and it is eaten away. So, part of the dispelling of myths is that people are not making bad decisions with their money.
Right.
They don't have enough money for the
Right.
work that they are contributing. Chris, I wanted to maybe come to a close on our incredibly inspiring conversation. And again, just thank you so much for your time today. I am just feeling so many things. Um, but I wondered if you could share with everyone listening in, something that they might not know about people who are struggling or experiencing homelessness or unhoused or housing insecurity, any of these things. I mean, you literally show up every day for the community that you're in. What are some things that you think people should know?
I think the thing that I am so happy I learned is that you can have is that the people in the community that you are providing food with are incredibly resourceful, competent people. And you can learn as much from them as from anyone else. And that is what I think I take away from this. You can also have meaningful relationships with them. We don't have opportunities to get together with people who are a little different from
It's
us.
true.
We all tend to gravitate to our own group. But this is a place where you can have meaningful, warm relationships. And if you allow the people to be true partners in the development of what you're doing, it will be incredible. It will be much better than you could ever try and create on your own. So I think recognize the competence and the warmth and I don't know, just wonderful people that are represented in the people that you're serving.
And mirrored right back to you, Chris. Thank you for sharing a bit of yourself with us, your warmth, your sagacious words, your experiences. Thank you for your time today, Chris. I know that I personally look forward to our next conversation,
You too.
and and for everyone listening in, perhaps we could have Chris on another conversation to continue, helping us to again have this pool of information that we can draw from as we think about how we want to show up and how we want to help support our communities. So, Chris, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciated talking with you, and thank you everyone for listening in. And please be in touch if you have any questions. And don't forget, Chris did have the issue of internet and telephone. So if you've done this in your community, if you've solved this for your community, please be in touch because we want to make sure that we're getting resources over to Chris as well. Thank
Great.
you everyone for your time. Thank you again, Chris.
Thank you.